Hello, mindful friends. My name is Dr. Amy Saltzman, or Dr. Amy, and it's a pleasure to be with you today to discuss sharing the practice of mindfulness with children, tweens, teens, teachers, counselors, therapists, physicians, parents. And today's session will be some discussion of the data regarding mindfulness, and it will be primarily practice-based. I will be happy to share the slides with the event organizers, so there shouldn't be a real need for you to take notes. And I encourage you strongly to participate fully in each activity. So now we'll begin, and I'm going to share my screen with you. So I'd like to actually begin with a practice, and my hope is that the practices will be offered by spoken translation, but if not, you may need to read through the practice and then hit pause and do the practice and then resume the video. So if they're being spoken
여러분도
and if
해보고
you're
싶다면
willing, begin
편안하고
by closing your
바른
eyes
자세로 앉아
and allowing yourself to
눈을
sit in an
감으십시오.
upright and comfortable position and
그리고
focusing the breath.
복부에서
Focusing the
내쉬는
attention
숨에
on the
집중해
breath
봅니다.
in the belly.
숨을
Feeling the belly
들이쉬면서 복부가
expand with the
팽창하고
in-breath
내쉬는
and
숨에
release with
수축하는
the
걸
out-breath.
느껴보세요. 호흡에
See if you
집중했던
can rest
주의를
your attention
편안하게 쉬게
on the
하면서
sensations of breathing.
복부 안에
Feeling the
있는
rhythm of the
호흡의
breath in the
리듬을
belly.
느껴봅니다. 숨을
Feel the
들이쉴
belly
때마다
expand with each
팽창하는
in-breath
복부와
and
내쉴
release
때
with each
수축하는
out-breath.
숨을 느껴보세요.
See
첫
if you can
숨을
feel the
들이마시는
entire
순간부터
in-breath from the
복부가
very
팽창해
first
숨이
sip
고요해질
and
때까지의
expansion
모든
all the way
호흡을
through to where the breath is
느껴봅니다.
still. And
그런
then
다음
feel the
내쉬는
entire
첫
out-breath
순간부터
from the
숨이
very
고요해질
first
때까지의
whisper and release
모든
all the way
호흡을
through to where the
느껴보세요.
breath is still.
이제 고요해질 때까지 숨을 들이마시고 고요해질 때까지 숨을 내쉬면서 호흡의 주기를 느껴봅니다. 그런 다음 들숨과 날숨 사이에 또는 날숨과 들숨 사이에 고요하고 조용한 곳에서 숨을 고르고 휴식을 취하세요. 호흡하면서 편안해집니다. 그리고 마음이 방황하게 되면 호흡의 리듬에 다시 주의를 기울여 봅니다. 이 명상 연습이 끝나면 호흡 사이에 느꼈던 고요함과 조용함이 여러분과 항상 함께한다는 것을 기억할 수 있을 겁니다. 여러분이 숨을 들이쉬거나 숨이 고요할 때도 함께하며 여러분이 숨을 내쉬거나 숨이 고요할 때도 함께합니다. 여러분이 영상을 보거나 이메일을 보낼 때도 가르치거나 가족과 대화할 때도 화가 나거나 기쁠 때, 슬플 때, 신날 때 모두 함께합니다. 이 고요함과 조용함은 여러분 안에 항상 살아있으며 여러분이 호흡에 집중하면 쉽게 찾을 수 있습니다. 호흡에 집중했던 주의가 편안해지도록 1분을 드린 다음 명상 연습을 마칠까 합니다. 혼자 천천히 크게 3번 호흡하세요. 그리고 아직 눈을 뜨지 않으셨다면 뜨기 전에 지금 순간의 기분을 주목해 보세요. 그리고 준비되었다면 눈을 뜨고 영상에 집중해 주세요.
So, if we were together in person, I would ask you how that was for you, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And most likely, some of you would say that it was very peaceful. And others of you would say that your mind was distracted, or your body was fidgety, or you felt sleepy or uncomfortable. And what I would like to tell you is that if you noticed your experience, that is mindfulness. And we often get the idea that mindfulness means we need to be calm and peaceful and relaxed. But really, mindfulness simply means paying attention here and now with kindness and curiosity so that we can choose our behavior. So I'd like to break that definition down. Paying attention here and now means doing our best to have our attention in the present moment and not obsessing about the past or worrying or fantasizing about the future. With kindness and curiosity means that we bring these qualities to paying attention, because otherwise, as human beings, we tend to beat ourselves up and tell us that we're doing it wrong, or we should be doing it differently, or simply just notice our mistakes. So when we pay attention here and now with kindness and curiosity to our breath, our thoughts, our feelings, our bodies, the situation, and the people in the present moment, we have all the information that we need to choose our behavior. So I want to stop here and share some of the scientifically documented benefits of mindfulness for students. So students who practice mindfulness have increased attention, increased executive function, which means their ability to remember things, plan, organize, and control their impulses. And this increase in executive function is related to decreased ADHD behaviors, so decreased hyperactivity and impulsivity. Students have fewer conduct and anger management problems. They have increased emotional regulation and resilience. They have increased self-calming, increased social skills and social compliance, increased care for others, decreased negative affect, meaning decreased negative emotions, decreased anxiety in general and decreased test anxiety in particular, decreased depression, increased sense of calmness, relaxation, and self-acceptance, increased self-esteem, and increased quality of sleep. The benefits for adults who are working with children are similar, but I want to emphasize a few other things. Adults who practice mindfulness in any profession experienced decreased burnout, decreased compassion fatigue, decreased stress, anxiety, depression, and physical pain. And they experience increased resilience, self-efficacy, self-compassion, compassion for others, well-being, and sense of meaning and purpose. And those 3 slides that we just had were the most data-dense slides we'll have for the whole session. So before we begin to talk about the possibilities of sharing mindfulness with youth, I would like to encourage you to consider your balance in your energetic bank account. So any activity that we engage in is either a deposit in our energetic bank account or a withdrawal from our energetic bank account. So for example, attending this conference actually might be both a deposit and a withdrawal. So you get to practice some mindfulness, and that can be a deposit. You get to learn some information, and that may be a withdrawal. Other things that can be a deposit are listening to music, taking a bath or a shower, getting exercise, talking to a friend, having a nice meal, reading a book, practicing mindfulness. Withdrawals might be teaching a new lesson, or having a disagreement with a student or a parent, having a disagreement with a colleague or an administrator, getting sick, needing to care for a loved one who's sick, financial stress. So it's really helpful to think about what are your particular favorite deposits and what are your significant withdrawals, and to do your best on a daily basis to make your deposits more than your withdrawals, or to have a positive balance in your energetic bank account. And throughout this session, we're going to share some ways for you to do that. So I'd love it now if you could pause this and get a piece of paper and draw a diagram that looks like this with the 9 dots, but without the box around it. So I'm going to give you just a moment to get a piece of paper and a pencil and to draw this figure without the box. And when you're ready, I'd like you to connect all 9 dots using 4 straight lines. And the lines can cross, but you can't lift your pencil. So when you're ready, I invite you to begin the exercise of joining the dots with 4 straight lines. Again, the lines can cross, but you can't lift your pencil. And as you're doing this, I'd like you to notice your thoughts and your feelings. And I'm going to give you about 3 minutes to do this exercise, and then we'll continue. Just a gentle reminder to notice your thoughts and feelings, and see if you can notice them with kindness and curiosity. And you'll have about 1 more minute. And now 10 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Pencils down. So before I show you the answers, I'd like you to ask yourself some questions and maybe even write your answers underneath the place where you did the puzzle. So, what were you thinking? What were you feeling? I'll give you a minute to answer those for yourself. And be honest. How did you speak to yourself? Were you kind and encouraging? Or were you perhaps not so kind and not so encouraging? And again, be honest. And I'll give you just 1 more moment to write down any other thoughts or observations. So again, before I show you the solution, I want you to consider that for your students, this experience of having a test or a puzzle or a math problem or an essay that they feel they need to perform well on is a daily reality. And it can be, and perhaps it was for some of you, quite stressful. And we often teach in a way that has us believe and has our students believe that there's only one right answer. And students go from class to class and then home to do homework, having this experience. So here are the solutions. And I want to talk about that for a minute. So if you look at the blue solution, you'll see it begins in the bottom right-hand corner and goes up to the top left-hand dot. And then it goes down from the top left-hand dot past the bottom left-hand dot, and then diagonally up through the middle bottom dot and the middle right-hand dot past the top right-hand dot and then across to the top left-hand dot. So the first thing to note is that solving this puzzle required thinking outside the box. And I did give you that hint at the beginning of the exercise. The second thing to note is that even if we take this one solution in blue that's shown on the screen, you can realize that there are actually 4 solutions because the solution can be rotated 3 times to 90 degrees. So you could start in the top right-hand corner, the top left-hand corner, and the bottom left-hand corner. So there are actually 4 solutions of the same design rotated 90 degrees. Then if you look on the right-hand side of your screen, you will see that there are some additional creative solutions. So I think it's helpful for us and our students to remember that often there is more than one solution in life. So there are a couple points to this exercise. The first is thinking outside the box. The second is remembering that there are multiple solutions to problems. The third is noticing how we talk to ourselves when we're faced with a challenge, and perhaps developing the ability to speak with ourselves more kindly. And now I want you to think about a particular student in your classroom. And I want you to think about the box that you put them in, maybe the box that they put themselves in, and the box that their other teachers and their parents and their friends or their not so friendly classmates put them in. So choose one student and just notice the boxes that you might put them in. And maybe you think of this student as very bright or lazy or difficult or stubborn. And I want you to consider the possibility that they are more than the box that you put them in. And I want you to consider the effects of this box on their experience with you and in their classroom. Because students often live up to our expectations or down to our expectations, as the case may be. And I want you to see if you can notice that moment when a student steps outside their box, when the lazy student is really trying, when the bright student is really struggling, when the stubborn student is motivated, when the motivated student is lazy. And I just want you to practice meeting your students moment by moment. And then just for fun, I'd like you to consider the boxes that you put yourself in and to consider the pluses and minuses of the boxes that you put yourself in. So for example, sometimes we consider ourselves funny, and sometimes it can be really exhausting to be funny. And sometimes we aren't feeling funny, we're feeling sad and we'd like support. But if we've kind of defined our role as the funny person, it can be hard to ask for support. The same is true if you consider yourself kind of tough or together or stoic. It can be hard to ask for support. Or if you consider yourself kind, it can be difficult to say no, when really that may be the best and healthiest thing for you. So Again, just considering the boxes you put yourself in, and then maybe the boxes your students or your colleagues or your family put you in. And consider those times when the box is helpful or the trait is helpful. And then consider the times when perhaps a different behavior would be more helpful. Okay, my friends, we are going to do another practice. So I'm going to encourage you to leave the 9 dots practices and the thinking about the box that you put your students in and the boxes that you put yourselves in the past.
현재 순간으로 돌아와
This moment.
가능하면 눈을 감고 복부로 쉬는 호흡에 집중해 주세요. 호흡에 집중하고 복부에 집중하세요. 호흡의 리듬에 맞춰 집중했던 느낌을 편안하게 풀어보세요. 준비됐으면 이 순간에 느끼는 감정에 집중해 보길 바랍니다. 가끔 이 감정들은 평범한 이름인 분노, 슬픔, 기쁨, 흥분으로 불리고 가끔 이 감정들은 사나운 불 같은 쾌활한 공허함과 같은 생소한 이름들로 불립니다. 그냥 이 순간에 어떤 기분인지 주목해 본 뒤 이 감정이 몸 어디에서 느껴지는지를 주목해 보세요. 관자놀이에서 오는 당김일 수도 있고 가슴에서 느껴지는 따뜻함이나 뱃속의 울렁거림일 수도 있습니다. 몸 어디에서 이 느낌이 나타나는지 찾아보길 바랍니다. 몸에서 감정이 어떻게 느껴지는지 주목해 보세요. 감정이 크거나 작은가요? 가볍거나 무거운가요? 시원하거나 따뜻한가요? 부드럽거나 삐쭉빼쭉한가요? 움직이거나 고요한가요? 몸에서 감정이 실제로 어떻게 느껴지는지 주목해 봅니다. 이제 준비가 되면 감정이 색깔이 있다고 보거나 상상해 보세요. 색깔이 없다면 괜찮습니다. 감정에 소리가 있다고 보거나 상상해 보세요. 소리가 없어도 괜찮습니다. 때때로 우리의 감정에 이렇게 주목해 보는 것도 충분합니다. 그리고 때때로 우리의 감정이 우리에게 무엇을 원하는지 물어보는 것도 도움이 됩니다. 가끔 감정은 여러분의 시간이나 관심 또는 상냥함과 같은 단순한 것을 원합니다. 또는 음악을 연주하거나 돌을 던지거나 친구와 대화를 통해 그들을 표현하고 싶어 합니다. 가끔 감정은 더 복잡한 것을 원하거나 우리가 줄 수 없는 것을 원합니다. 그것은 나중에 좀 더 자세히 얘기할게요. 준비가 되면 감정에 대해 생각하고 호흡에 집중해 봅니다. 혼자 천천히 크게 3번 호흡하길 바랍니다. 그리고 눈을 떠 여러분의 집중을 넓혀보세요. 무엇이 눈에 들어오고 느껴지나요? 그 느낌은 몸 어디에서 느껴졌나요? 그 느낌은 어떤 느낌이었나요? 그 감정은 색깔이 있었나요? 그 감정은 소리가 있었나요? 그 감정은 여러분에게 무엇을 원했나요?
So I'd like to tell a brief story about my daughter and how she used the feelings practice when she was singing in the school talent show. So when she was about 9 years old, she was performing in the school talent show, and they had a rehearsal, and the rehearsal didn't go well. It was really hot. The audio system didn't work. My daughter felt very nervous. So when she came home that evening, we did feelings practice together. And she said, my feeling is fear. And I said, okay, what does the fear want? And she said, the fear wants to be in charge. And to be honest, in my own mindfulness practice, I thought, well, that's not what feelings usually want. But I believed her fear. And I said, well, how do you feel about fear being in charge? And she said, I don't want it to be in charge. And I said, okay, then why don't you tell it that? And after a brief discussion with her fear, she and her fear agreed that fear could come to the performance, but it could not be in charge. And the way she chose to symbolize this was my mother, her grandmother, had given her a very tiny worry doll, and she put the worry doll in her pocket. And so fear got to come to the performance, and love and joy of singing were in charge. So that's an example of a time when a feeling wanted something from the person who was having the feeling, and the person who was having the feeling didn't feel it was wise to give that particular thing to the feeling. Another common example is when someone's upset and they want to either harm themselves or harm another person. That's usually a time where we don't want the student to give permission to the feeling to do that. And so you can say, no, you cannot punch your classmate in the nose. And what do you think might happen to you and to the classmate if you punch them in the nose? And what are some other options? So that gets to choosing our behavior, which we will continue to discuss in later portions of this session. Before we get to choosing our behavior, I wanted to say a little bit more about feelings. So there is a researcher named Paul Ekman, and he's studied emotion all across the world. And he has found that there are 7 universal emotions: happiness, sadness, anger, fear, surprise, contempt, and disgust. And Dr. Ekman says that in their natural habitat, feelings have a time course that looks somewhat like this. We'll talk about my disagreements with that in a minute. And at the top of a feeling, there's something called the refractory period. And when we're in the refractory period, we're in our lizard brain and we can't think clearly. We can't take someone else's view. We can't be creative. We can't be compassionate. We're in survival mode. So we're in fight, flight, or freeze. So if you're aware that you're in refractory mode, the best thing that you can do is allow the wave of feeling to pass. And if you're aware that someone you want to talk to, again, a student, a colleague, or a family member's in the refractory period, you want to wait till their wave passes, because no matter how kind or brilliant or helpful you're being, they won't be able to hear you if they're in the refractory period. So this is just a picture of us when we're in the refractory period. So the first thing I want to say is that I think Paul Ekman's lovely curve is a little bit oversimplified. And often when I have children, tweens, teens, adults draw their emotional waves, their drawings look much more like these drawings. So a general ramp up and then a big spike and then staying above the refractory period and then a slow taper, or maybe a quick ramp up and continuing to stay in a spiky way above the refractory period until the feelings settle. So we are all human beings, and we can have more than one emotion at the same time. So I can feel angry and afraid, or angry and sad, or happy and afraid. So just individually, if we're having two big emotional waves at the same time, and those waves combine, we get an even bigger emotional wave. And in physics, this is actually called constructive interference. Now, if we have an emotional wave and we can bring a little bit of calmness to the situation, then we may get little ripples, but not that big wave. And in physics, this is called destructive interference. Now, if you're interacting with someone else, or if you're responsible for a whole classroom or a gym full of students, or a theater or music amphitheater full of students, each student and you and anyone else involved can have more than one emotional wave. And so if you combine all those waves, you can have an emotional tsunami. But if even one or two people can bring some calm to the situation, then the wave will be smaller. And if you use this analogy in your classroom, then you can say, it seems like something on the playground or in the hallway or in the cafeteria caused some emotional waves. So we're going to do a feelings practice and give our feelings some time and some space and some kindness and curiosity. And then we're going to resume our lesson. Welcome back.
계속 실습을 하겠습니다. 화면을 공유할게요. 좋아요. 눈을 감고 앉아 호흡과 복부에 있는 호흡의 리듬에 주의를 기울여 봅니다. 잠깐 여러분의 몸을 간단히 점검해 보세요. 에너지가 넘치거나 필요한지, 지루하거나 신났는지, 배고프거나 배부른지를 주목해 보세요. 그리고 준비가 되면 호흡하면서 여러분의 발에 집중해 보세요. 발에서 느껴지는 감각에 주목하되 먼저 새끼 발가락부터 감각을 느껴보세요. 이어서 약지 발가락, 중지 발가락, 검지 발가락, 엄지 발가락. 이제 발바닥을 따라 호흡과 함께 주의를 기울여 보세요. 발바닥 앞쪽, 발바닥 안쪽, 그리고 발꿈치에 집중해 보세요. 그리고 호흡과 주의가 발의 근육, 힘줄과 뼈를 따라 발목으로 올라갑니다. 그냥 발의 감각을 느껴보길 바랍니다. 여러분의 양말과 신발과 여러분 발에 느껴지는 공기의 감각에 집중해 보세요. 이제 호흡과 집중은 발목 위로 올라가 종아리와 정강이로 갑니다. 피부에서 근육을 통해 뼈에 느껴지는 감각에 주목해 봅니다. 호흡과 주의를 무릎으로 이동해서 무릎을 받쳐주고 움직이는 근육과 힘줄을 느껴보세요. 관절의 뻣뻣함과 움직임에서 느껴지는 감각에 집중해 보세요. 그런 다음 호흡과 집중은 허벅지 뒤쪽을 따라 이동합니다. 의자와 닿거나 닿지 않는 허벅지에 주목해 보세요. 호흡과 주의가 허벅지 바깥을 지나 허벅지 위쪽과 허벅지 안쪽으로 이동합니다. 그런 후에 다리와 몸을 연결하는 골반을 느껴봅니다. 그리고 골반에서 숨이 확장하고 유지되다 이완되는 것을 느낄 수 있습니다. 엉덩이에서 느껴지는 감각에 주목해 보세요. 그리고 복부가 팽창하고 이완하면서 복부 안에 있는 호흡의 감각에 다시 집중해 보세요. 호흡과 주의가 등 아래쪽으로 올라와 호흡을 통해 등 하부의 팽창과 이완을 느껴보고 등 상부와 중앙에서 호흡을 느껴보고 날개뼈 사이에 느껴지는 감각에 집중해 봅니다. 호흡과 주의를 가슴으로 돌려 이동하면 가슴과 등 전체, 배와 골반이 있는 몸통 전체를 느껴보세요. 몸 전체가 호흡하는 것을 느껴보세요. 호흡과 주의는 팔을 지나 손가락과 손으로 흘러 이동합니다. 손바닥, 손등, 손가락과 엄지에서 느껴지는 감각에 주목해 봅니다. 심지어 손가락 사이 공간에 느껴지는 감각도 집중해 보세요. 다음은 호흡을 어깨로 보냅니다. 목 뒤로, 옆으로, 앞으로 보내서 긴장 또는 통증이 있는지 유연함 또는 편안함에 집중해 봅니다. 호흡과 주의를 얼굴로 이동합니다. 턱, 입 또는 볼이 느껴집니다. 코끝에 느껴지는 호흡의 감각에 주목해보고 눈과 이마에서 느껴지는 감각에 집중해보세요. 호흡과 집중은 머리 측면으로 이동해서 귀, 뒷머리, 그리고 머리 꼭대기로 이동합니다. 뇌로 호흡과 주의가 흘러가도록 합니다. 그리고 몸 전체가 숨쉬는 것을 느껴봅니다. 발에서부터 다리를 지나 몸통, 팔, 목, 머리, 뇌까지 호흡과 주의를 이동시키고 머리끝에서 목을 지나 발, 몸통, 다리, 그리고 발까지 다시 내려오면 좋아요. 빨대로 물을 빨아 올리듯이 호흡에 집중해서 올라갔다가 이완하면서 몸을 따라 내려가면서 몸 전체가 호흡하는 것을 느껴보세요. 숨으로 여러분을 채웠다 비우고 비웠다 채워보세요. 이 실습이 끝나면 여러분의 몸, 정신과 마음을 잠깐 살펴볼 시간이 필요할 겁니다. 이 순간에 여러분이 무엇을 느끼는지에 주목해 보세요. 준비가 되면 천천히 크게 3번 호흡하길 바랍니다. 그리고 눈을 뜨고 영상에 집중해 주세요. 저희는 몸 알아차리기 실습을 하나 더 한 뒤 이 모든 것을 조합해 볼 겁니다. 왼쪽 손가락들을 이용해서 오른쪽 검지를 뒤로 굽혀 보세요. 다치지 않도록 어느 지점에서 멈출 것인지 느껴보세요. 굽히는 걸 멈췄다면 여러분의 손가락을 좀 더 굽히거나 덜 굽혀야 할 필요를 느낍니다.
So these two types of practices allow us to bring our attention into our bodies, and often our bodies give us the first indication of what we're feeling and thinking. So if you remember the two practices we did earlier, observing our thoughts during the 9 dots exercise and befriending our feelings, often our thoughts and feelings show up in our bodies. So if we can learn to tune into our bodies, they will often provide an early warning system for us. Another note that I think I forgot to mention in the first half of the session was the intention for the feelings practice is for us to be able to have our feelings, to be aware of what we're feeling without our feelings having us. So if I'm aware that I'm feeling angry, if my voice is getting a bit loud or a bit fast, if my heart is beating fast, if my shoulders are going up, if I'm clenching my fists, that is an early indication of an emotional wave. And if I can notice the emotional wave in my body at the moment, often I can take a few short, deep breaths and the wave will pass and I don't react out of my anger. If I can't catch the emotional wave early, then I want to wait for the wave to pass before I choose my behavior. So now I think we're on to choosing our behavior. So I'm going to read this poem and then we will talk about how it relates to choosing our behavior. So this poem is called An Autobiography in 5 short chapters. Chapter 1, I walk down the street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I am lost. I am helpless. It isn't my fault, and it takes forever to find a way out. Chapter 2, I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in the same place, but it isn't my fault, and it still takes a long time to get out. Chapter 3, I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it is still there. I still fall in. It's a habit. My eyes are open. I know where I am. It's my fault, and I get out immediately. Chapter 4, I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Chapter 5, I walk down another street. So I'd like you to consider a hole in your life, and a hole is a repetitive problem. So maybe it's an argument you keep having with a student, colleague, administrator, or family member. Maybe your hole is procrastination. Maybe your hole is believing you're thinking and getting depressed. So just consider one hole. It doesn't need to be the biggest hole in your life, but just one hole that you have. And then consider some different streets. So I'm going to talk about a common hole for school-age children. And that has to do with doing homework or doing chores. So when it's time to do homework or to do chores, students often get angry or frustrated and spend a lot of time arguing. And if they know that and you know that, then you can choose a different street. They can choose a different street. So rather than getting, say, frustrated with math homework, it might be time for a student to go get a drink or a snack, take a walk, listen to a favorite song, and then come back to the math problem. So the analogy of holes and different streets is a way I use to teach students about responding rather than reacting. So another place that this might show up is that someone might say something unkind to a student on the playground or in the cafeteria or in the hallway, and the student may get angry and say something unkind back. And other streets would be for the student to walk away, to take a deep breath and say something funny, to get help from a supportive adult rather than letting the argument escalate. So we can all learn to respond rather than react most of the time, but maybe not all of the time. So now I'd like to give you another practice that will support you in responding. And as with all of the practices, you can teach these practices to your students as well. So this is a peace practice, and it's an acronym in English. I don't know how it's going to work in Korean, but I'm trusting you can figure it out. So this is a practice for when things are difficult. So when you notice things are difficult, the first step is P, which is for pause. Simply pause. The next step is E, and E is for exhale. So when you notice things are difficult, you want to pause and exhale. And after you exhale, you want to inhale and just keep breathing. A is for acknowledge, accept, and allow. And I'm going to use an example for a student. So perhaps your backpack with all your stuff is gone. Your best friend is now your ex-best friend. Your boyfriend or girlfriend is now dating your ex-best friend. And so acknowledging the situation simply means that you recognize the situation as it is. It doesn't mean you like it. It just means that it is the way it is. Accepting it means accepting that it is the way it is and allowing all your feelings, angry, sad, jealous, all of the above. And then C is for choosing your behavior. And C involves some other C's. So compassion for yourself, which my colleague Karen Bluth is speaking about, compassion for others, compassion for how hard and complicated it can be to be a human being. Courage to speak your truth and hear the truth of others. Clarity, willing to be clear about what's your responsibility and what's someone else's responsibility. And the last C is for comedy, and a better word might be humor, but humor in English doesn't start with C, so we'll go with comedy. Sometimes just finding a sense of humor can be extremely helpful. So after you've paused, exhaled, acknowledged, accepted, and allowed, and chosen your behavior, then you can engage with the situation. And when you engage, you may engage after a few minutes or a few hours or a few days or a few weeks, but you want to wait until you can engage skillfully. So it's helpful to remember that you can use this peace practice, in any difficult moment. And sometimes there are moments where doing the entire peace practice the way we just did it is a bit too long. And so in those brief moments, you can use a shorter acronym, ABC, for aware, breathe, choose. So this might be for a moment, again, when a student's struggling with homework or a difficulty with a friend, or a mistake in a musical performance, or when they're doing sports. And it can be as simple as, I'm aware I made a mistake, I'm taking a deep breath, and I'm choosing to move forward. Okay, here are some of the choices that you can use for the C of choice. So one is to take a breath or several breaths. 2 is to feel your feet on the floor. Sometimes when things are difficult, we get into our heads and we're thinking and we're feeling. And if we can just drop our attention down into our feet, or even breathe our attention down out through our feet, that can be really helpful. Having a mistake ritual can be helpful. So when I work with athletes, we talk about making a flush motion, or brushing the mistake off your shoulder, or making a symbol for like Control Alt Delete. I know that Karen's going to discuss self-compassion, but even just something as simple as putting your hand on your chest and saying, I'll get through this, or I'm here for myself, or this too shall pass. Just giving yourself a moment of self-compassion is often a good choice. We're going to talk about listening in a minute, and then we're going to talk about mindful communication and responding. So here's another poem. I'm going to read it slowly. If you want, you can close your eyes and just let the poem wash over you.
시의 제목은 들어주세요입니다. 내가 들어달라고 부탁했을 때 당신은 나에게 충고하기 시작했고 내 부탁을 들어주지 않았습니다. 내가 들어달라고 부탁했을 때 당신은 왜 내가 그렇게 생각하지 말아야 하는지 이야기하기 시작했고 내 감정을 짓밟았습니다. 내가 들어달라고 부탁했을 때 당신은 내 문제를 해결하기 위해 무언가 해야 한다고 느꼈고 이상하게 보이겠지만 그런 당신은 나를 실망시켰습니다. 들어주세요. 내가 오직 바라는 것은 들어달라는 것입니다. 말하거나 행동하지 말고 듣기만 하세요. 나는 혼자서 할 수 있으며 무력하지 않습니다. 낙심하고 비틀대지만 무력하지 않습니다. 내가 스스로 할 수 있는 것을 당신이 해주면 당신은 나의 두려움과 무능함을 돕는 것입니다. 하지만 아무리 비논리적이어도 만약 당신이 내 느낌을 그대로 받아들인다면 나는 당신을 그만 설득해도 되고 이 비논리적인 감정을 이해하는 데 집중할 수 있습니다. 만약 그렇게 된다면 답은 명백해지니 조언은 필요하지 않습니다. 비논리적인 감정은 그 속을 들여다보고 이해하면 통하게 됩니다. 그러니 제발 들어주세요. 당신이 말하고 싶으면 당신의 순서를 기다리세요. 그때 내가 들어줄게요.
So often when we're in a heated moment, we are so busy thinking about what we want to say and we want to do and how we're right and the other person's wrong, that we're not listening. And that leads to those big emotional waves and the emotional tsunamis. So again, if one person in the dialogue can remember to listen, often that will calm the emotional waves. So when you're having a difficult communication with someone, it can be very helpful to follow this format. So you might begin the communication saying, look, obviously we're having some difficulty here, and I'd like to suggest that we use a mindful communication practice so that we both can hear each other and come up with solutions. So first, I'd like to hear what you feel. First, actually, I'd like to share what I feel and I want. So I might say to a student, I've gone over this multiple times. I feel really frustrated and I really want to help you. And in order to help you, I want to know what you feel and you want. So I'm going to put aside my frustration and I'm going to put myself in your shoes. And I want you to tell me what you feel and what you want. And then the student may say, I'm also feeling really frustrated and I want to do well and I want to understand, and it's just not making sense. And so could you please explain it more slowly? Or could you explain it again? Or could I maybe talk to a different teacher who might explain it in a different way? Or could I talk to a student who you feel understands it and that will help me understand it? So the crucial part of this communication exercise is we need to step out of our shoes and into the other person's shoes and really be willing to hear how things are for them and be willing to work on creative solutions with them. Okay, this is just a reminder about the data that we reviewed at the beginning of the presentation. And I just want you to remember that mindfulness helps both children and adults with stress, anxiety, depression. It enhances attention and resilience and problem solving. It increases compassion. And so it's really helpful if we practice it on a daily basis. This is just to reiterate, mindfulness is beneficial for students, parents, teachers, families, administrators, athletic coaches, athletes, musicians. And this is to share some other people where the data has shown that mindfulness is beneficial. So again, musical performance, athletic performance, business performance, first responders, medical professionals. So I want to close by saying that if you want to share mindfulness with youth, there are a few cautions that I feel are truly important. The first is, if you want to share mindfulness with youth, it is essential that you have your own mindfulness practice. So an analogy that I like to use is a swim instructor. So if you were going to be a swim instructor, you would want to know how to swim. You would want to be able to explain how to swim and how to improve your swimming in language that your swimmer could understand. And you would be able to you would want to be able to jump into the water and help a swimmer if they were struggling. Because occasionally, not often, but occasionally, when we invite our students or young people to tune into how they're feeling, they become aware of difficult feelings. And if we haven't spent time befriending our difficult feelings, we're not going to be able to support young people in befriending their feelings. The second thing, and you need to think about how this applies to your culture, but you want to be able to present mindfulness, at least in the United States, we need to be able to present mindfulness in a secular way. And I think I've given you a good feeling for how to do that. But in the US, in public schools, we're not allowed to share religion. And so we can't present mindfulness as Buddhism, and we need to simply present it as paying attention here and now with kindness and curiosity so we can choose our behavior. And then the last thing is we want to be aware that many of our youth are suffering with anxiety, depression, stress, trauma at home, trauma at school, bullying, internet bullying. And so we want to be aware, again, that students may get in touch with difficult emotions, if we want to be able to support them through that in the moment, and then to help them get additional support from a counselor or a therapist or a physician if that's needed. So you want to know who your resources are in your school or community setting. For both adults and youth who are practicing mindfulness, it's something that you want to practice repeatedly and have practices that you can use in difficult moments. So when I'm working with students in a school or on an athletic team or in my private practice, I give them recordings of the practice, and they usually choose to do the recordings either when they come home from school, before they do their homework, before they go to sports practice, or often at night before they go to bed. The body scan that we did is particularly helpful for students who are suffering from insomnia, so they can do that before bed. And then you want to find a time to do your practices as well. And there's a saying, knit your parachute before you're on the way down. I don't know why it's knit, but sew your parachute might be better. But we want to do these practices on a daily basis so that then they are available and accessible to us in moments of joy and moments of difficulty. I wanted to share a few resources with you. I have CDs that are available on iTunes and Spotify. The Insight Timer is a free app that's available on both Apple and Android devices. And it has literally thousands of mindfulness practices. There are several of my practices that are on there. All of my practices are available on Spotify. And then I have 3 books. The book on the left is for professionals or adults who want to share mindfulness with youth, and it walks you through the steps of how to develop your own practice and then how to share mindfulness with youth. The book in the middle is a workbook for teens, and it's definitely can be used for adults. And then the workbook on the right is specifically for athletes, although it could be used for any performers, musicians, performing artists, mixed media artists. And if there were interest in members of this group, I would be happy to offer an online course for those who want to teach mindfulness to youth. And you can find more information on that course on my website, or you can reach me via my email. And I think I forgot to say that each book contains downloadable audio practices. Unfortunately, they're in English, but they are in the book and you can download them and you could play them for yourself. You could play them in your classroom. You could play them for your athletic team or your musical group. And I do encourage you to reach out to me. I'd be happy to email with you. I'd be happy to set up a course for those of you who want to teach mindfulness to youth. I'd be happy to answer any questions. So just to close, I wanted to say thank you. Thank you for your willingness to be here now. Thank you for your kind and curious attention. Thank you for your joyful participation and your commitment to excellence. And I'm going to stop my share and give you one more smile. And again, encourage you to reach out for support. It's been a pleasure to be with you. And I hope that you find these practices beneficial for yourself and that you are excited about starting a personal practice if you don't have one already, and then sharing these practices with the young people in your lives. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.